Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today to get through this thing called life. A legend of words, life brings forever. That's a mighty long time, but I'm here to say,
Hello everybody, I'm Bucky Badger W, and welcome to episode 2 of the Bucky Badger W podcast. And today, I'll be talking about power rankings, and first up, we have the ACC, and the ACC has two teams ranked. They have number 4 Clemson, who will probably get to the playoff, and number 25 Wake Forest. If you extend that to just teams that got a vote to be in the AP top 25, you got Virginia 27, Pitt 28. This is a weak conference for sure. But the thing about the ACC is that they got a lot of those middling teams. You go down the list. You got Louisville, Duke, Boston College, Virginia Tech, North Carolina, Florida State, North Carolina State, Miami. You can even put in there. You can possibly put Pitt in there. They just got a lot of middling teams, and anybody can beat anybody on any given week, other than Clemson, and Georgia Tech isn't going to win a lot of games. But it's a interesting conference to watch. At the same time, though, you don't have a matchup all year that's really a big matchup. Like, the biggest matchup is probably going to be, I'd assume, a possible Clemson Virginia ACC championship game, or it already happened, Clemson North Carolina. So the ACC isn't that good this year, but it's kind of interesting. But you're not having the big matchups that we're seeing this week. Ohio State, Wisconsin, Auburn, LSU, Notre Dame, Michigan. You're not having those in the ACC. And that being said, I think the pretty obvious, for sure the obvious pick. I don't think anybody has anybody other than this team at number 1. We have Clemson. They're 7-0, and my reasoning is that it's just impossible to put anyone else at number 1. The Tigers have easily the best offense and defense statistically in the ACC, and on paper, on offense, you got really good offensive line. Other than that, you got Trevor Lawrence, one of the best quarterbacks in college football. Travis Etienne, one of the best running backs in college football. T. Higgins and Justin Ross, two of the best receivers in college football. The offense is stacked, and then you got stars like Xavier Thomas, Isaiah Simmons, and then sort of stars and Tanner Muse, Kayvon Wallace, guys like that on that defense. Greatly coached. Brett Venables, their defensive coordinator, could for sure defensive coordinate in the NFL. Not sure if he could coach in the NFL, but yeah, he could for sure defensive coordinate. Dabo Swinney might be able to coach in the NFL. And just resume-wise, it looks like Clemson has already passed 2 of their 3 biggest challenges this year. They went on the road at North Carolina, won a really tough game. That was a good game to watch. We will talk about that again when we get to North Carolina. They beat Texas A&M at home, really dominated that game. They still have a challenge in South Carolina. That might be their toughest game of the regular season on the road. I could see them losing that game. South Carolina's looked really good. But yeah, you can't really have anybody but the Tigers at number 1, and I don't think that they should have any problem going 13-0 and getting to the college football playoff. Up next, we have number 25, Wake Forest. This is a good team. They're led by quarterback Jamie Newman, wide receiver Sage Surratt. I wouldn't get my hopes up to contend with one of the top teams in the country, or contend for an ACC championship, or even come close. But I think that this is a good team for Wake Forest, and I'm not sure of their ceiling yet. I think that this is a really good team, and New Year's Six Bowl, I don't know, but a top 20 finish at the end of the year isn't out of reach. They've proven with their 6-1 record and wins against Utah State, North Carolina, and Boston College that they're here to stay, and they could be pesky team to overcome for Clemson in that ACC Atlantic Division. For them, a game in Death Valley Saturday, November 16th. That looms large for them, and that is going to be a tough game for them. I would not predict them to win that game, But I think that Wake Forest could shock some people and pull the upset of the year in that one. Next, we have a very good team, number 27 in the country right now, not officially ranked, but a very good team in the Virginia Cavaliers. They're led by the two Bryces, I guess, Bryce Perkins at quarterback and Bryce Hall at corner. And other than poor execution against Notre Dame and Miami, Virginia has looked really good this year, has a win against the number 4 team on this list, and I think that this is a really solid team. I don't think that they'll beat Clemson. That is clearly the goal for everybody in the ACC. I don't think that they're the team that'll do it, but I think that they, more than Wake Forest, have a chance to get to New Year's Six Bowl. Although I think Wake Forest, their floor is a bit higher than Virginia, but Virginia, they can play really well when they're at their best. And next we got a team that they've suffered some close losses. They lost a lot from last year. A lot didn't come back from last year, but they just keep chugging along. And that team is Pitt at 5-2 with wins against Syracuse, Duke, and UCF, as well as close losses at Virginia and Penn State. Pitt looks very good this year. They're led by quarterback Kenny Pickett. This is a very, very good team, I think. And they're not going to beat Clemson, I think. I think their ceiling is lower than Wake Forest. They have that loss to Virginia. I don't think that they're making it to the ACC championship game. But a fair warning to all ACC teams, watch out for Pitt, because this is a good team. And at 5, this is kind of a bit of a weird team. This team is 4-3. They're coming off of a blowout loss, and it is Louisville. The Louisville Cardinals, this is the only team to beat Wake Forest this year. They won that game on the road, 62-59. And even with the worst defense statistically by a long shot in the ACC, Louisville has been a pleasant surprise in the Coastal this year. And I think that this team, they're 6-win capable for sure, and they have some upside on this team. I think that this is the start of the next tier in the ACC. I think you got Clemson, then you drop a tier, then you got Wake Forest, Virginia, Pitt, then you drop a tier. Then I think there's a lot of teams in this next tier, but Louisville, I think, leads them. They've got some big wins. They got some big games coming up, and even coming off of loss at Clemson, I still think this is a very good team. Don't sleep on them. And the number 6 team is another quote-unquote basketball school, another big-time overachiever this year, another pleasant surprise in the ACC Coastal, and that is the Duke Blue Devils, not the Blue Duke Devils. Duke is 4-3, and Duke doesn't have any bad losses. At the same time, they don't have any big wins. Nothing is too special about this team, but I think that this team is a pleasant surprise. If they're able to beat North Carolina, I think that justifies this ranking of 6. I really like what Duke is doing up there. After losing out on Daniel Jones, he's starting to look like a pretty good quarterback in the NFL. And just to measure how hard it was to rank these teams, I had to map out number 5 through number 11, and I had to map out who beat who. That was how tough it was to decide how to rank these teams. That said, number 7 is Boston College. Boston College Eagles 4-3. They have no big wins and no big losses, other than a blowout loss against Kansas, and I think that's what puts them behind Duke in my book. You can't lose to Kansas like that. Kansas lost to Coastal Carolina at home. You can't lose like that, and I think they lose that game. Other than that, they look solid, and that is why they're here at 5 instead of any higher, or here at 7 instead of any higher or any lower. Next is a really hard team to rank, in my opinion. It is the Virginia Tech Hokies, and they are 5-2. So, I mean, you might be thinking, why isn't Virginia Tech higher up on this list? Well, it's because they lost at both Boston College and Duke, and they lost pretty bad in those games. Big overtime win against North Carolina this week, and I think that this Virginia Tech team did really good in that game. Just losses against Boston College or Duke, I can't put them higher up than any of those teams. on the list because of those losses. That's why they're down there. And next we have a team that I think is really good, but if the season ended today, they would not be in a bowl game. And that is North Carolina. North Carolina is so hard to rank. They're 3-4, and Carolina plays up or down to anybody in the country, which makes them very frustrating to watch if you're a North Carolina fan. But nonetheless, I think that this is one of the best teams in the country when they're playing at their best. It's just, when are they going to play at their best? You know, they lose to Appalachian State. Appalachian State looks pretty good this year. But it's a Sun Belt team that you lost to at home. At the same time, they beat Miami, South Carolina. South Carolina beat Georgia. North Carolina beat South Carolina. That says a lot about them. But then also at the same time, and they're out here, they're losing to Virginia Tech. They're losing to Appalachian State. It's just they're losing. They're 3-4 right now, and they're not losing to really bad teams, I guess, but they're still not beating. They're still not beating those teams. But then at the same time, they almost beat Clemson. So I mean, I don't know. It's tough for It's tough to watch North Carolina if you're a North Carolina fan. Sometimes they can play with Clemson, at other times they can lose a lot of games. But I think that this North Carolina team, they can be as high as the number 2 team in the conference when they play their best easily. So I really like this North Carolina team most of the time. And as my dog is barking in the background, and yeah, I'm sorry about that. But my number 10 team is Florida State, and they are 3-4. This team doesn't really have a bad loss on the schedule, but they're not. I mean, hopefully for them, the hope is that Cam Akers can carry them to a bowl game, because their passing attack isn't getting it done right now. No, they almost lost. This team almost lost to ULM. You can't do that, and still be considered a good team in the ACC. And I mean, it's just not looking great for them right now. I don't think that this is a bad team. This team is still, they got a good defense, they got a good running game. They just got to get some things cleaned up. Taggart's got to get things figured out, and once they do that, I think Florida State will be off and running. But right now, this just doesn't look like too great of a team. And number 11 in the ACC, we have NC State, and this is a team, they can't seem to win the big games. They lost at West Virginia. They really got pummeled in that game. They lost at Florida State. They kind of got pummeled in that game. They lost at Boston College. Once again, they kind of got pummeled in that game. But this is still a 4-3 team. Wins over Syracuse, Ball State, WCU, and East Carolina. So really no big wins to speak of. But I mean, nevertheless, it's a 4-3 team. So you can't fault them too much. I think that this is at the very least a pretty solid team. And if they had a loss to Syracuse, they would be a lot lower on this list. But as it is right now, they stand at number 11. Next is easily the most disappointing team in the ACC. They've disappointed for the second year in a row right now. The season isn't over for Miami, but it's not looking good for them. Not unlike UNC, Miami can really play up or down to many teams in this conference. And on paper, they're one of the best teams in the ACC. They just can't seem to get it done. They lose to Georgia Tech this past week. I really contemplated having them below Georgia Tech, but with how bad Georgia Tech has looked the rest of the year and how close that game was, I still got Miami over them. But without the Virginia win, this is a 2-5 team, and it doesn't look like they're getting to a bowl game without that win against Virginia. And that was really because of Virginia's poor execution. So I wouldn't really say that this team should be 2-5, but Miami does not look good this year. While being on paper one of the better teams in the ACC, they got to get that fixed down there in Miami. And at 13, kind of just a boring team this year, and that is Syracuse. Last year they were really good. This year they're 3-4, and 3-4, you could say they should be ahead of Miami, but they're 0-3 against ACC teams. And I think it's just a lot more them playing weak competition with them getting to 3-4. I think Tommy DeVito, not great at quarterback. Mo Neal is a good running back, but there isn't too much for Syracuse fans to get excited about. This is still a good team. Um, this team could this team could foreseeably get to a bowl game this year, but I don't like where Syracuse is at right now. And the worst team in the ACC this year, number 14, we have Georgia Tech. Not a good team this year. They're transitioning from the triple option into the non-triple option, which is that's a tough transition. Didn't expect them to be good this year. This just isn't a good team though. I I like that win in Miami. Um, Showed a lot of fight, and I think that showed a lot about the character of this team. I just don't think that this team is real talented. In a couple of years, maybe they will be back towards the top of the ACC. Just right now, they are not. They're not there.